She passed away.
We'll invite Pastor Jim into the conversation when he gets here. So, we're doing a 2-week lesson on women of the Bible. And when you do a lesson on this, you can go 8 ways to Sunday, right? You know, there's so many different ways you can approach this. So I thought I'd start with a joke, because that's what I do. So here's our little joke for the day. What we're going to start with, I have handouts, but before I pass them out, I'm going to tell you what some of my resources are. So when I study women in the Bible, I went to the obvious place. The Bible, and the Women of the Bible for Dummies, because those seem like 2 places that were pretty good to go to. So I have a cheat sheet from that, which is an interesting perspective. I've never used them before. And then in our offices, we have all sorts of resources. But one of the ones that I have been peeking at for the past probably 6 months is this one. It's a daily devotion. It's called Women in the Bible, and it has 52 different women of the Bible. And then it takes a week of readings on them and studies. So it takes you a little bit deeper into them. So if anybody ever wants to use my resources, my office is always open to you. You can always come and use it. And our library is spectacular. This one is Ann Spangler and Jean Siswerda. So this is, I've found a lot of enjoyment in this book.
She has a actually by women, not by men.
Well, there's the first clue where I might be good. So here's why I think it's important that we study women in the Bible. Of the 66 books in the Bible, there's only 2 that are entitled with names of women. Anybody know those?
Esther and Ruth.
And what's unique about those books? Anybody know that?
They're entitled names of women.
There's hardly any mention of God. So in the book of Esther, there's no mention of God.
Oh, wow.
In the book of Ruth, it talks about the God of Naomi, but there's not conversation with God. There's not relationship, interaction with God. Now, when you go to the other 64 books of the Bible, you often see conversations. You see when it's talking with the men, there's much more emphasis on those relationships directly with the Lord.
Those were patriarchal societies.
Bingo.
Yes.
They are very much so, and that's an important point. As we go on, only 1% of the speaking in the Bible is done by women. But in the culture, then, that would have stood to reason as well. Which is why the women we'll be studying are so extraordinary, because they really were countercultural. And what are women today being asked to be? In a lot of respects, we're being asked to be countercultural. I will give you one personal anecdote in my own life. For 40 years, I was told I couldn't be a pastor, and I was a Lutheran. Because I was raised in a Lutheran church that was patriarchal, like the societies we're talking about. I did not know church was a safe place for me to have a voice. Because at the age of, let's say, about 10 years ago, so in my mid-30s, when I was asked to give my testimony about my son, the one that I did my message in here about our book, I was told, you can share this at church, but you have 5 minutes. And I was silenced in my own church home. It wasn't until the ELCA was introduced to me, and there was a strong, bold statement of how women are loved here, that I was able to put my guard down and feel safe. In the Bible, if you read the Bible inerrantly, as a lot of our denominations do, you will still have women not being able to teach in churches, not being able to preach in churches, not being able to uncover their head in churches. If you read it word for word, you would be submissive to any male around you. So go ahead.
But here's the paradox. It may be that there are still some places where the patriarchs are doing the right thing. And there are some places where the patriarchs are not doing the right thing. And someone needs to step forward to do the right thing.
There's truth to that. And that's why we're going to study some of the women who did step forward in that boldness, right? And there are people today who are stepping forward in boldness to do what's the right thing. But what is the right thing? That's the question, right? Like, who's the judge of what is right?
God.
Right. but we read these words through our own filters.
Right.
So we all say we know exactly what God is saying, but we're putting it through our lens. So as we rip this stuff apart, I want you to open your minds a little bit to what you've always known. Open your minds to new possibilities. Because as we study these individuals, I want you to think about, whether you're a male or a female, how this pertains to you today. All these hundreds of years later, right? Thousands, in this case, yes, thousands of years later. So, let's first ask the question, what do you know about women of the Bible?
There are lots of them.
There are lots of them. In fact, I have an alphabetical sheet, if anybody ever cares to have it. I'll be happy to. You can move my stuff, please. I have my costume change. I have pages upon pages of women of the Bible. And we've purposely chosen one woman who, if you say her name in one context, she's evil, the other context, she's great. So it's interesting when you read through this how sometimes the most important women didn't even get a name. They were just called the woman at the well, right? Like these names, these stories that we studied.
The Samaritan woman.
The Samaritan woman, right? So,
Lot's wife.
bingo. So what else do we know about the Bible? About women in the Bible?
A lot of them that are named are known as prostitutes.
Ha!
Oh, good
Okay.
one. Good one.
Some of them named were called to do special missions for God.
Yep.
Mary had a call.
Mary's a really good example of that.
Yeah.
How often after they live out that calling do you hear about them later in the Bible?
Never.
Usually they like come on for their scene and then they're gone. Even Eve. I mean, Eve's a pretty significant person, but you don't really hear
It's
much.
mostly in an historic context also.
Mhm.
Is this, that person was there at that time.
Yeah, that's true. How about Jesus and women? What do we know about Jesus and women?
He liked them.
Heck yeah, he did. Who funded the ministry of those disciples?
The women.
Yeah.
And who formed
They must have
them?
listened better and more closely.
I mean, they cooked for him.
They did all the
They
hospitality.
perfume all over him.
They were the party planners.
Yeah. But that was part
Behind
of
every good man, there's a really great woman. Just saying.
Yep.
That's right, just ask Barbara.
Or your work wife. I mean, just saying. I'm kidding. Yesterday at the concert, we shanked him. He's often being shanked by these women in his life. Poor guy. All right, what do you want to know? What do you want to learn from these next 2 weeks?
More about who these women were.
Are we holding up their standard?
Ooh.
Oh.
Anybody else?
I don't know if I want to learn that. Because I think I know the answer to that.
Well, or do we think we're doing something when that wasn't their intent or?
Oh, that I like.
And I think with each story, I mean, if we look at all the women that I mentioned, there's a story behind each name. So the intent of each person is a little bit different.
Yeah, I'd like to know their stories
All right.
and what we could learn from their stories to apply now.
So we're going to whet your appetite, right? Because there's way too many for us to cover everybody. So the way we plan on teaching this class is, for example, today we're going to pick out 4 women. And we're going to talk about them. Some may be familiar, some may not be familiar, right? But we're going to kind of relate them to our own lives to see what was so unique. Why did these people get called out? Why did they get a name? Next week, we're going to actually talk about names. So we're going to be looking at what our names mean and how do our names play out. In biblical times, the names were really critical. It wasn't by accident the way people were named. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the significance of our names. So we're going to, we'll build on what we do today, and we'll see how far we get. And then next week we'll add to it. Okay?
Great.
Great. All right, so when those of you just coming in, I said we went to a very reliable source this time. and of course everybody guessed the Bible, but actually it was the Women in the Bible for Dummies. So that's one of our source.
I didn't even know that was a book.
Oh, they got one for everybody. So you can just take one down, pass it around. Hi, Gary.
It worked.
I'm not sure I have enough. That's how I can display it. All right, so here's what we're going to look at. I'll read this. This is at the top of your sheet. I'm not going to read your sheet. That drives me crazy when people give a handout and then just read it to you. But women in the Bible are prominent and obscure. The Bible mentions women by name, by title, by familial relationship, and sometimes just by geographical location. This cheat sheet you're handed provides insight into the bad girls, the top moms, the visionaries, and will entertain you with some little known facts and songs about biblical women. So, today we're going to do more of like a picking at you, what you know, who you know. So let's look at the first group, the 5 bad girls of the Bible. There are so many stories written about books about the bad girls of the Bible.
There's a nice book on them too.
There are multiple books. And it's almost like we want it to be dirty or something. Right? Like that sort of entertains people. But
You didn't make the list.
I didn't.
You gotta keep working at it. You gotta keep
Not
working
living
at
up to those standards. So what do you know about these folks? Have you heard of any of them?
Jezebel.
Herodias.
Herodias.
Delilah. Oh, she was a bad one.
They're all bad.
She was a bad one. Yes. Cutting off Samson.
It's such a great word, isn't it? All right. So on this sheet, I made sure to include biblical references, simply because we're so crunched for time in our setting that we're not going to be able to go through every one of the people on this sheet. So Jezebel, obviously, most of us have heard about. And you can go and read these things to hear this. I think it's just interesting. They say that she died a gruesome death. So it almost like, if you want to have a definition of karma, Jezebel might be it, right? What goes around comes around. Then Herodias, remember the name Herodias is often assigned to anybody who is any woman married to a Herod. But this particular Herodias, she's the mother of Salome, and that's important because we're going to talk about Salome later this morning. But she really is one that kind of sums up adultery, right? Because she really had it for her husband's stepbrother, and this just leads to the demise of so many people. She was evil to the core.
She was the one that had John the Baptist bad.
Yes, it's because her daughter Salome is the one who did the dance that lures Herod into saying, "What do you want? I'll give you the world," and said she wants the head of John the Baptist. Athaliah, have you ever heard of her?
No.
Okay, but she comes from the lineage of Jezebel.
No wonder.
Right there.
Fall far from the tree.
But how gross is that? She had her own grandchildren killed to secure the throne for herself.
Oh, that's bad.
That's bad. That's not like naughty. That's bad. Yeah, exactly. Then Delilah is a popular name of one of the bad girls in the Bible. We've seen her with Samson. And then how about this last one?
I've never heard of her.
Never heard of her.
I don't even know if it's called Maacah or Maacah. But she, again, is one of the bad girls because she was into promoting idolatry. I'll let you read more on her. Now we're going to look at just some of the top moms. The top moms, these names are pretty, these are just 3 of them that I think most of us have probably heard. But I don't know if you realize that Moses' mom's name was Jochebed. Right, that's sometimes, she gets lost in translation as a person who isn't named, but she actually had a name, Jochebed. And so she had a pretty important role, right? And so those of you that have heard Claudia Warner do her presentation on Miriam goes a little bit into Jochebed. That's another good one. And then Hannah, we're going to study Hannah a little bit more today. This is the mother of Samuel. Hannah, to me, is somebody who I look up to as being faithful in prayer. So this is a woman that, as we talk about being impatient, she just kept going to the Lord, and I'm guilty of making deals with God. You ever make deals with God? She made a very big deal to God and followed through on it. So we'll talk about her in a little bit. And then, of course, we have the Virgin Mary. I mean, how can you talk about the moms without talking about the Virgin Mary? But what I want to stress is all of these women that came before us, in my opinion, are mothers. Whether they were bearers of children or not is irrelevant. They paved the way for us. Like, we are children of these women that went before us, and we can all learn from them. So for me, like, as we're studying the women of the Bible, they all kind of fall into this category. Sometimes we learn good things from our moms, sometimes we learn bad things from our moms. Sometimes we don't like our moms, sometimes we love them dearly. So these are all women who paved the way for us. If we look to the female visionaries, these are typically the women who are called prophetesses, prophets, but the female version. Miriam was definitely considered one of them. Deborah was another one. Huldah is one that we're going to talk about, because have you ever heard of Huldah?
Huldah, remember Huldah?
No.
Oh, come on now.
Do I?
What do you remember? What do you tell us about? What do you remember?
Well, we did a Bible study on Deborah.
I don't remember Huldah, I'm sorry.
Anyhow, you enjoyed it, as I recall.
I love the Bible.
Huldah sounds like
We
a
did a
good
Bible
German
study
name,
on
doesn't it?
Deborah one time,
Okay.
and Huldah came up in the conversation,
Sure.
and I got hung up on Huldah, and so the Bible study, we said, it's Deborah, and then Huldah, and these folks said, "Who's Huldah?"
Right?
And we had all this good stuff on Huldah. So
She's great.
And
In
then
fact,
she
I find
forgot.
her great. We'll refresh her memory. We'll dust off the cobwebs today. You'll get it. Don't you worry. And then there's Anna, the only prophetess in the New Testament. And I think that's an interesting fact. And they really didn't need to have prophets once the Messiah actually came, right? But she's the only one in the book of Luke. And then I always love little tidbits, like trivial facts, right? So these are some trivial facts for you to pull out in some random game of Trivial Pursuit. Sarah is the only woman in the Bible to have her name changed from Sarai to Sarah. Oh, look, I'm way behind in my deal. Deborah is the only female judge. Athaliah is the only woman to rule the kingdom of Judah. 700 women became wives to Solomon. That is just a bad guy.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, actually, let's back up to that.
It is incomprehensible.
You didn't.
The Songs of Solomon, you know he's a womanizer.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's like Bible porn, right?
And there's 700? And those are only the ones that became wives.
Yeah, concubines, there
They're
are 300
concubines.
concubines.
Oh, yeah.
What?
Yeah,
That's
1,000.
crazy.
I mean, how do you remember other names?
Being
You don't.
in a harem didn't necessarily mean that you were called to sleep with the
And if, I'm going to do a Bible study at some point on Esther, where we'll really go into what that meant to become a wife to somebody, because they would literally plump you up. You were fattened up to be more voluptuous, and they would do beauty treatments to you, and then if he'd want to call on you, he'd call on you, and you went. And you may only sleep with your husband one time or not, but that was just it was all about his appetite for love. But if we go back, you're right. This is one worth mentioning. There were women who ruled kingdoms. Like,
Wow.
and what was it? Pastor Jim, you might be able to remember this. They had uncovered stones recently, like hieroglyphics in a cave. Do you remember? I can't remember where it was, but they actually showed women, like with their hands up preaching, and women ruling. So it shows, like, in this time, women had more power than what our history books show. So it was really unique. I'm glad you pointed that out and had us go back to it. But it happened. And Judith, I didn't make the list, but she was another one that, I mean, really, some of these women, they paved the way for us to have, and when I say us right now, in that context, paved the way for females to be clergy. So some of these early mothers really, they were preaching. where do you think the disciples learned a lot of their stuff?
Right.
So they were doing more teaching and leading than we know. And this one, the daughter of Herodias, is never identified by names, but they believe she was called Salome.
Different Salome than.
Different Salome than the one we're going to study, right?
Okay.
But then if we just look, the other kind of cool thing about women in the Bible are these songs. Are you familiar with any of these songs?
Songs of Virgin Mary.
Yes, especially, the Mary one.
The Magnificat?
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's look at the Song of Deborah, because that's not one that I know offhand. So if we look at Judges 5, here, I'm going to pass it. Pastor Jim, you have your Bible in front of you. Will you pull up Judges 5 for us?
Yeah.
The Song of Hannah and the Song of Mary are very similar. And if you actually look at them, they're just praise songs of praise. Their hearts are so overwhelmed with what's happening in their world that they are just songs of praise. Really think about, does everybody know the story of Hannah? All right, we'll come back to Hannah because we're going to talk about her. Mary, think about being a virgin girl in the middle of Podunk. All of a sudden you're pregnant and you've never had sex. And somebody says, it's like, Jesus, come in. Imagine the fear that she has, knowing she would be killed for being married or pregnant out of wedlock. And she's pretty pregnant and she flees to go talk to her cousin Elizabeth. And she gets in, her cousin Elizabeth, who's much older than her, is also pregnant. Right? And then their babies like dance. I mean, really think about how this story unfolds is a little bit crazy. But she doesn't sit there and think, I've lost my mind. She sits there and praises God. And she just trusts. Like the level of trust that Mary had, it's unbelievable. And it comes out in song. Is that the Judges one? All right, so here's Deborah's. Thank you. Ooh, this is like a nice big letter. I kind of like this.
For an old man's eyes.
I'm digging it. All right. So Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoah, sang on that day, saying, when locks are long in Israel, when the people offer themselves willingly, bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. To the Lord I will sing. I will make melody to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled. The heavens poured, the clouds indeed poured water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, caravans ceased and travelers kept to the byways. The peasantries prospered in Israel. They grew fat on plunder because you arose, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. When new gods were chosen, then war was in the gates. Was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel? My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offer themselves willingly among the people. Bless the Lord. And it goes on. When they would say bless the Lord, like it seems weird because we in our culture context always think of we receive the Lord's blessing. But what I learned actually from Pastor Fred, Sarah, was when we say bless the Lord, it means worship the Lord. Right? So what they're singing is they're giving history. You notice all the history that's being rattled off here. And every time in the midst, good, bad, ugly, doesn't matter, they're saying worship the Lord. So they continue on. This is very similar to how the Psalms are written. They'll take you through this whole path, and they always end it, no matter how bleak it gets, they always end it with worshiping God, with praising God. So I'm trying to get to the end here. So perish all your enemies, O Lord, but may your friends be like the sun as it rises in its might. And so it ends, even though it's telling us, like, it's asking God to protect him from the enemies, it ends with praising God. Let your light shine. All three of those songs do that.
But Jael got Deborah there too. Good old Jael.
So you hear all the history in it, like they tuck so much into those songs. So those songs are written differently. Actually, let me show them. Because of this nice big print, I can show them. See how the regular Bible is lined up like that? You know when they're actually having conversation because it's indented. Or they're singing, or it's a psalm. Because it's indented like a dialogue in a novel, right? And so those are ones I always like to pay attention to because it's coming from somebody's heart. It's going to teach you something. All right. So these are who we're going to focus on. I stole this next picture from your Facebook because I loved it. We're going to talk about Eve and Mary. We're going to talk about Hilda, Salome, like which one, because you always have to make sure you know who you're talking about, and then Hannah. That's who we're going to focus on today. Adrian posted this the other day, and I found this to be a beautiful piece of art to share. So I'm going to just shush for a second so you can, maybe I should read it for those that are online and can't see.
I have no chance of reading that.
Actually, I'm right on top of it and I can't, so. All right, we'll go this close. This picture, it takes my breath away. I first saw this beautiful drawing from Monastery Candy last year, and I haven't been able to get it out of my mind since. If you take a few minutes to really look at this picture, I think you'll be just as captivated by it as I am. I think the thing that grabbed my attention the most was the bringing together of two very well-known women of the Bible, Eve and Mary. I mean, seeing them together doesn't make sense. They aren't even mentioned in the same book of the Bible. Or are they? Not by name, at least. First, let's look at Eve. The despair on her face. It's the face of knowledge of sin and shame. The forbidden fruit, still in the clutches of her hand. The serpent, still with his tight grip, coiled around her leg. The same evil that holds so many of us captive today. And her hand outstretched to Mary. Sweet Mary, obedient Mary, could you imagine being a teenager and being told that you would give birth to the Messiah? See the compassion on her face as she gently comforts the ashamed Eve. And that serpent that once held Eve and mankind captive. Just like Genesis 3 prophesied, the baby she is carrying will crush the head of the serpent. All because of the one thing that she and Eve have in common. The babe in Mary's womb. The wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, Jesus. Eve and Mary, two women you wouldn't think to talk about in the same sentence, yet two women whose stories were woven together from the very beginning. From the fall to glory, let us not forget this Christmas that we are celebrating the beginning of redemption from the fall in the garden so many years ago. The King has come, and salvation is here. O death, where is your sting? O hell, where is your victory?
Very good.
Cool. What jumps out at you when you look at it?
I love the fact that Mary's got her foot on the snake. I think that's just so cool.
I see the completion of a cycle, and then the feminist in me gets a little upset because I see that one way or another women get stereotyped and blamed and praised. Blamed and praised.
It's also interesting that Eve, being the woman of the Bible, seems to be minimized with Mary as the mother of Jesus. Mary is looking like the mother as opposed to Eve, that we are introduced as the mother of the nation creation.
I always felt like Eve got a bad rap.
I have a bumper sticker in my office
I
that
know.
says Eve was framed.
Yeah.
What does it say?
It says Eve was framed.
Well, see, I think of her as a metaphor for the first female, but not as a real person. I don't ever think she was somebody called Eve, ever.
Well, it's so beautiful too, because Eve's hand is right there on
on her tummy.
Mary. And it looks like it's on her, right at her abdomen, right where the uterus would be.
The baby bump.
We've been
When you look at that, you think of where God is in the beginning. In the beginning, God was Word.
And then you look at Jesus was there in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and he's there with Eve, and he's there with Mary,
Mm-hmm.
and he'll be there at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it fits.
Why do you think she'd still be holding on to that piece of fruit?
Why do we still sin?
Yeah, right.
But I mean,
Symbol.
for the artist's interpretation, yes, I totally agree.
Yeah,
It's the
that's,
point across.
that's why. That's what
Because,
I
but I
think.
mean, wouldn't you think, it's like, if you did something, and then you found out it was so bad, wouldn't you get rid of that bad immediately and not ever wanna have anything to do with it again?
That's what guilt's all about, like, people just keep that,
Oh, they hang on to it, yeah.
yeah.
Eve, but maybe she's bringing that to Jesus as part of her confession
Okay, okay.
for forgiveness, you know?
You all need to come and hear the message in the next service.
Her facial expression just to me shows it all. You know, I did this and I'm sorry and I'm worth nothing, sort of feeling to me.
She's certainly humbling herself.
Well, at the same time, you gotta feel,
There's
I'm
always
the
an interesting
impetus for
aspect
this
of
lady to be
communion.
having this child.
Oh, yeah, there is a communion.
It's the what?
It reminds me of the experience I have at communion.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because I would say 99% of people come up to the altar when they come, and what's the first thing they do? Is they bow their head, just as Eve is. Like, that's really the posture you take. Receiving.
Mm-hmm. But Mary's doing the same posture.
Yeah.
But in
back
a
to
different
her.
way, because
Yeah.
she's taller, right? It's almost like there's a power there.
But she, to me, she's saying, it's okay.
Yeah.
Look who's with me. You know, it's okay.
She's not, yeah, it makes it look like I'm not above you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm your sister. When she's bowing her head to her, like that.
We're gonna, with that picture, go ahead.
Oh, part of the eating of the fruit is that you'll have pain in childbirth.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
good
yeah.
point.
And so she has the fruit of your womb now will bear pain that's coming. That could be an image there. Living out the scriptures.
Totally agree. We've been studying saints in our Advent services midweek, and we've been talking about like last week it was the people who use art. What was the saint now? It's slipping my mind.
Ambrose?
No, the week before.
Ambrose.
Jerome?
Jerome. It was the one that I did. But anyway, it was saying how our faith is lived out through these art forms as well. And like, look at the conversation that generated by looking at this this picture. Pastor Jim, will you read this devotion piece as you're looking at this picture? I think it matters. So it just goes, it's just this right there.
Okay.
This is from the book I shared that I'm using right now.
The woman stirred and stretched, her skin soft and supple as a newborn's. One finger, then another moved in gentle exploration of the ground that cradled her. She could feel a warmth filling her, tickling her throat as it tried to escape, spilling out the strong, glad noise of laughter. She felt surrounded, as though by 1,000 joys, and then a touch calmed her without diminishing her joy. Her eyes opened to a brightness, her ears to a voice, and then a smaller voice, echoing an elated response. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. Adam took hold of her, and her laughter met like streams converging. The man and the woman walked naked and unashamed in paradise. No shadows filled Eden, no disorder, discord, or fear. And one day a serpent spoke to the woman. Did God really say, you must not eat of any tree in the garden? You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The woman listened. She remembered the brightness, the voice of God that had filled her with joy. Could she really be like God? Pressed hard by desire, she took the fruit, then shared it with her husband. Suddenly darkness spread across Eden. It came not from the outside, but from within, filling the man and the woman with shadows, cravings, and misery. Order gave way to disorder, harmony to discord, trust to fear. Soon Adam and Eve heard the sound of their Creator walking in the garden, and they hid. God called, "Where are you, Adam?" Adam replied, "I heard you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." Sin had driven its wedge inside their hearts, and God banished them from Eden, pronouncing judgment first on the wily serpent that had tempted the woman, and then on her and on her husband. The serpent's curse, he added this promise: "I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." To the woman God said, "I will greatly increase your pain in childbearing. With pain you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Then God warned Adam after that after a lifetime of hard labor, his strength would decrease until his body would finally be wrapped in the dust from which God had formed him. The curse of death fell suddenly upon the new world. So Adam and his wife were forced to flee paradise, and Adam named her Eve because she would be the mother of all the living. But her firstborn, Cain, became a murderer, and her second son, Abel, his victim. As the years passed, sorrow chased sorrow in the heart of the first woman. And the last we see of her image, her not as a creature springing fresh from the hand of God, but as a woman in anguish, giving birth to another child. Her skin now stretches like worn canvas across her limbs. Her hands claw the stony ground, grasping for something to hold on to, for nothing to ease her pain. She can feel the child inside filling her, his body pressing for ways of escape. The cries of mother and child meet like streams converging, and Seth is born. Finally, with her child cradled against her breast, relief begins to spread across Eve's face. With rest, her hope returns. A smile forms, and then, finally, laughter rushes from her lips. Try as she might, she cannot stifle her joy, for she remembers the brightness and the voice and the promise God gave. Sooner or later, despite many griefs, her seed would crush the serpent. In the end, the woman would win.
Thanks. Interesting when you read that and you look at the picture in a minute, right? Like that yellow, I didn't even notice it before until you're talking about the brightness, and then the yellow just kept jumping out at me. But it gave meaning to her face, didn't it? All right, we're going to move on from Eve to Huldah.
That's awful.
So I was trying to get art, Terry.
I know. I'm sure there's a reason for this.
Actually, I quite like her because I think she was a brave soul. So I'll read her character name. Remember I said there's importance to the name. What did we hear that Eve's name meant? Anybody here pick up on that piece?
Mother of all creation.
Mother of all creation. Now Huldah is being put into a very peculiar situation, but then her name means weasel.
Means
Wow,
weasel?
really? Weasel.
Weasel. Ooh.
So what comes to mind when we say weasel?
Slimy.
It's a real negative undertone, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting name to me for her, knowing the importance of names, because I don't find her to be a weasel at all. So together maybe we can dig between the lines and see why she would have been given such a name. So,
Well, that's why she's called Weasel, because she did dig.
well, maybe that's it.
She got the stuff out of
She-
the
Maybe that's it.
earth.
So here's her character. She was trusted by the king with a matter of great importance. She was a prophetess whose word ignited a significant religious reform. So notice I said she was trusted by a king. Keep in mind, in those days, if you were invited to stand in front of a king, at any time you could just be beheaded. It was really frightening to be called before a king. Even Queen Esther, who was married to the king, wouldn't go before the king until she was beckoned. Because if you initiated standing before the king, it was usually death. It was not something that was happening. So to be called by the king, imagine, yes, he invited you. There still must have been tremendous fear because you didn't know what that meant, right? Go ahead.
There's a little preface to that
Sure.
in the study of Huldah, and that is that this was at the same time that Jeremiah was a prophet. But Jeremiah was off someplace on a mission, as I read, and wasn't just readily available, but Huldah was.
And tell us why. Do you remember why the king called her?
Let's see, because
Book of the Law.
So this book of the law was found. So here's the king. With the high priest, it says, she pressed the leather, well, this is their story, they write these stories. The king, who is King Josiah, was appointed because he was supposed to clean up the acts of people, basically. He was a good guy.
But
okay?
he was wet behind the ears.
Well, they all were wet behind the ears. But he was better than some, okay? He was considered one of the better guys,
He
right?
was only 8 when he started.
Well, if you're 8 years old and you're the king, you're going to make some mistakes, I assume. But what they did, they found this book of the law, and they needed somebody to interpret it because they didn't know what it meant. Now, I may have taken what she was given and flubbed because she had to tell them some hard facts of, you keep going, I'm going to paraphrase because of time, but if you keep going down this path, this place is going to burn to hell. Like, that's pretty much what she was telling them is, oh man, you're all messed up. That was her mission. And she had to unravel this to the king. Now imagine, the king could have said, I don't want to hear that. Right?
Right.
But she was being asked to interpret God's words, and she was a prophet, so she did that.
Wow.
And sure enough, what she claimed was true. What she prophesied happened. Okay? Wow. So it says here, she was one of only 4 women with an authentic prophetic ministry mentioned in the Old Testament. Though prophets like Jeremiah and Zephaniah were also active at the time, King Josiah consulted Huldah about the amazing discovery of the Book of Law, probably the material that forms the core book of Deuteronomy. So, in this particular book, they're telling us that, like, he had choices, but he went to her. And she had to me, this is one of the most bold actions of a female in the Bible because of knowing the history of how it is with kings and people being brought into their court. And not being able to share a positive thing. It says here, after Huldah's prophecy, her words of prophecy confirmed the king's fear. Judah was standing on a precipice. God was a jealous lover who blessed those who loved and obeyed him and cursed those who did not. Across the centuries, his slow anger was building to a fiery crescendo, and Judah's infidelities had not gone unnoticed. So she basically pulled down the veil and showed them what they've been doing wrong. Okay? After Huldah's prophecy, Josiah led one of the greatest religious reformations in history, purging Judah and even parts of Israel of paganism. So he took it to heart. Like, he called upon her, he acted based on her prophecy, and he did some reforms. However, kings who followed soon reversed the course, leading people astray once again. So the age of the kings in our Bible, really, we had these funny videos in our confirmation class. The kings were all in it for themselves, not for God. And I can't ever teach the kings without thinking of one of these crazy videos that we had. But the reality is, the kings led people astray because they wanted more for them, more greed, more land, more empire. And people became crazy, right? They just did what they wanted to do, very greed-filled. And what she said is, stop it. This is going to destroy you. He turned the tide. He made huge reformations and then new kings came in and destroyed what he had done. The words of Isaiah, a prophet who preceded Huldah by a few decades, proclaimed a future day of restoration. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities. Instead of their shame, my people will receive a double portion. Instead of disgrace, they will rejoice in their inheritance. So judgment, mercy, law, grace, punishment, salvation. These are all the characteristics of a love story with Christ. Huldah was a woman who understood that paradox and who was not afraid to proclaim the truth, even to her king. So, this is one I want you to chew on, because she was put in a really precarious situation, and she was bold. So how are you put in places like that? Think of our world right now. You can say we kind of are like the people who are doing the wrong thing, right? And she could be prophesying to us today just as much as she did to them. So what are you called to do? How can you be bold in this time? I'm going to give, we don't have much time, so I'm going to give you like a minute to just look at somebody next to you and have a conversation about what is it? What are we being called into action for? How can a woman or even a man have a voice today? This could be an hour-long conversation.
You go first.
Today, I don't know what you're,
We got it solved.
You got us all, yeah.
Wow.
I knew it.
You guys are good.
We can obviously continue this conversation. Any one of these people we're talking about could be a class long, right? I mean, we're doing Cliff Notes version Bible study right now. We're going to talk next time about Salome because we didn't get to it today, and then we'll talk about Hannah. But we'll also talk about 10 women in the Bible who exceeded expectations. And I will, I'm going to introduce you to this little part of Exodus with the midwives to do a little activity with that. And then we'll kind of try to save some time at the end for you to ask any questions that are pressing that you really want to know about women of the Bible. Or shoot us emails this week and we'll touch on them as well. If we need to continue this study, we can continue it. There's so much information that so many different ways to go. But I hope that cheat sheet gives you a little bit of guidance, at least a roadmap, if you want to look at more people, where to find them, since it gives all the Bible verses. Yeah.
It's also interesting that every Monday on the Bible Gateway website, there is a piece by C.S. Lewis on women of the Bible.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yep, it's very interesting. That's where I got most of my Hulda information. And,
Yeah.
and what you were citing there is your book was.
Did you accurate?
Did you say Bible Gateway?
Okay. BibleGateway.com.
Yep. And if you find any fun artwork that you want to share or jokes, send it to me and I'll put it in our slideshow for next week. All right. Peace be with you. Go have fun and get the service. If you